Hello and a warm welcome. In this video I want to show you guys how you can write your own World of Warcraft macros and what options and abilities you will have when you learn the basics of writing World of Warcraft macros. Um, it needs to be said that World of Warcraft macros are really powerful, though they are limited in some kinds, but we come to this later. For the sake of this video, I won't use the in-game macro creator. I will use here the notepad, so I can have it quite big and can have it quite big, sorry, and you can see everything quite clear. So the first thing you need to know when you write macros is that there is a prefix that you will add at the beginning of every macro, and it's called # or hashtag and then show tooltip. This line will cause the macro to automatically assign the icon and the tooltip to that macro. Basically, this will look for the first spell that has a valid condition in the macro, and it will put the icon and the tooltip on it. So when you hover over the icon in game, then you see the tooltip from it. So much for that. You can also, if you specifically want a certain ability or tooltip to show to explicitly state what ability should be shown. So you would write something like, yeah, my ability here. Just say my ability is whatever you want. Just link it from the spellbook in the macro into the macro, and this will force this macro to show the my ability tooltip cooldown and information on the icon of this macro. The next thing is to decide whether we want a standard macro or a Castsequence macro. We will start with the normal macro, the cast macro, and later in the video I will talk a little bit about the Castsequence. Okay, the cast macro is started with /cast, sorry, and then the ability name. So I will shorten this to my A. This will stand now for my ability or whatever you want to link here. Basically, we can cast everything, we can /cast everything that our character knows, every spell that we have in the spellbook, every talent, every item that we have in the back. I think in retail WoW, it is the /cast a function will work on basically everything. But if it does not work for some reason, most likely because it's an item or a trinket, then try /use. Previously, in the ancient days of World of Warcraft, and maybe in Classic, I don't play Classic, so I don't know. If it was an item, then you have to use /use, and if it was a spell or something that resembles a spell, then you use /use. But I think that both functions in retail WoW they work the same and then can be used on everything. So just use /cast, or if you need to save the space, you can also use /use, because a macro is limited to 255 characters, I guess, which is a little bit awkward. Okay, so one important thing is that a macro can only contain a single global cooldown, and the ability that triggers the global cooldown must be the last one. So everything after the global cooldown will not be executed. This is a limitation to macros. We can kind of work a little bit around this with the cast sequence, but I come to that later. So let's say you have your potion. So we said /use pod or cast pod, and then you link the name of the potion, or cast trinket, and so on and so forth. Then you would use the combat potion, you would activate the trinket, and then you would use the ability. So for example, for me as a paladin, I would use the combat potion and the trinket, and then I would pop wings, for example. And then I could even still cast a hammer of wrath, for example, because wings does not trigger the global cooldown. But it's a very important that again the ability that triggers the global cooldown is the last one. Now I want to move on to conditions. We can make certain lines in the macro only execute if certain conditions are met. And there is a massive amount of conditions, and I am really sorry if I miss one here, but I try to cover the most important ones. So let's shrink this down again to a single cast my ability. Between the cast and the ability name in square brackets, we can state a condition. So basically, there are conditions and modifiers. So let's say one of the most common conditions that I use is if I have pressed one of the three modifier keys. The three modifier keys are Shift, Control, and Alt. So in that case, I want if I press Shift, so I write mod and then Shift. This will cause the ability only to be executed, or when we press the button, if the Shift modifier is pressed as well. One little thing, this can clash with key bindings, and a key binding always has the priority over the macro. So for example, if I press Shift and 2, and on my 2 button there is a macro that has a shift condition, but I also have Shift and 2 bound to another action bar, then the ability or whatever we put into the action bar has priority over that macro. So whenever you write a macro and, for example, a modifier is not working, make sure that the key binding is free. So this is a condition, but we can also put a modifier into this, or a target modifier. So usually these abilities will always be casted at your current target, but we can change this. The easiest one would be maybe for a important kick that we have in the focus. We do the @ sign and then we set @ focus. There are multiple conditions or target modifiers that we can do. We can say, like I said, @ focus. There's also @ target if for whatever reason we want that, but that's also a possibility. We can say add mouse over. This will cause the macro to use the ability on whatever we currently mouse over. This can be a group bar, the own health bar, anything in your party frames or a nameplate, for example, and even the character model or a enemy model itself. So this will only fail if you not mouse overing anything. The next one is you can also say a specific mob. You say then the add and then you say add and then you would state the mob name. Just you would write it down. Mob name. For example. Have I forgot something? Focus, target, mouse over. Yes, I have forgot something. In case you want abilities to be casted or abilities that have a target indicator. I have to look up if I have one. I'm afraid I do not have one here on my paladin. Do I have some trinket or something? Sadly, no. But maybe everyone who plays a class knows it. Who plays a class that has one ability that's casted on the on the on the runic indicator. This is the green cycle that appears. Some trinkets use it as well. So usually you would press the button and then you would get a green cycle around your mouse, and then you have to confirm it with the left button mouse press. You can also make this easier in a macro where you say as a target condition add cursor. This requires the ability to immediately cast it at the cursor's position. No green circle, just the ability. You can also have conditions, not only target modifications, we can only have conditions. These conditions make the square brackets, they will always get evaluated, and if they are true, they are executed, and if they evaluate to false, then this line won't be executed. So you can have multiple lines with multiple conditions, and only the first one from top to bottom that gets evaluated as true is executed. So you can use that to your advantage. So the modifications that we have, there is something like no that. This means that whatever we have in the target, or if you use at mouse over, that we currently mouse overing, that we hover over with our mouse, is not that. So when it's that, it won't evaluate to true. The opposite of that is that. This will only evaluate true when the target is dead. All modifications or all conditions that are in one pair of square brackets, they are basically logically ended. So they are like with the logical end. So it will only evaluate to true when all conditions are true. So when we have one statement that is false, the entire brackets are false. But we not only have no that and that, we also have something that's called help. This means that we can help the target. So for example, if it's a friendly target, then we can usually help him. And if it's a target that we can cast helpful spells on, and the opposite for this is harm. So this only evaluates to true if we can harm the target that we try to cast something on. There's also this exist modification. Wait, I write it in the wrong place. Exist is very useful if you write a specific mob name that then this line only is evaluated to true if the mob is currently present. And you can have like maybe a priority list if you're in a boss fight with a lot of ads. You can cast on the ads or something you want to do if the ads are available, but if they are not available, we want to default back to something else like our target or something. we These are the most important ones. I think there are a couple of more. I will link down below the WoW Wiki article about this. You can look it up. These conditions are usually very self-explanatory. And yeah, easy to use if you know them. The next thing that is important is we can use multiple conditional things in one line. So let's say we have here our cast shift. We want to cast our my ability at our focus if the modifier shift is pressed. And we add this exist. So if we have and maybe not even this harm thing, that would be good. So if we have a focus, that means when we have something in the focus and we can harm it, then we would use my ability on it. And if, for example, mod shift is pressed, or else, this basically would be something like an else statement. Else, we want to cast this at our mouse over. If we can harm it, or and it exists. You can also put a empty square brackets at the end. This means that this bracket will always evaluate to true, and it will cast the ability in the normal way, in the very default way, so usually at your target. You can also have multiple spells with multiple conditions in one line. So let's say we want again here, the my ability on our focus, and if that does not evaluate to true, we want to check if this statement evaluates to true and cast a different ability, my ability 2. Keep in mind that you need to put a semicolon at the end of the line to make sure that this, if you put a comma or leave it blank, it might work, but things can get dodgy really, really quickly with macros, because they do not have a good feedback on things like syntax errors or something. So you can also make a second /cast line, but that would again waste 4 characters. And sometimes when you have a little bit like complicated macros, you really run out of space really quickly. And I think it's time for Blizzard to actually increase the number of characters in a macro, but that's a different story. So yes, that sums it up for normal macros. We can use multiple conditions, multiple stuff. So let's do one really quick thing. Let's say we have an ability with the runic circle, and oh yeah, one thing I forgot, but I will show it to you right now. Let's say if you also have to state, there is a statement that evaluates it to true if no modification key is pressed. This is really important because if you have certain conditions with modification keys pressed, and you have one line that you want without modification, that you only want to do when you're not pressing shift, for example, you need to state that with the no mod statement. No mod. This is the state that evaluates the true if no modification key is pressed. So let's say my ability is an ability that has the target indicator. So if no mod is pressed, we want the standard execution, the standard cast of it. So my ability. If we want, or if we have shift pressed, then we want to have it at the cursor. And if we press Control, we want to have it cast at the player. This also works for the add player statement also works for these runic abilities, the skill shot ones, that will be like dead centered under the character. Maybe useful for maybe a Death Knight that wants his Dev and Decay placed right underneath him. Maybe if you're a tank or something, this can be really useful. So maybe you wonder why I call them runic abilities. I think officially this is called, this green thing is called by Blizzard the rune indicator. Or it was called like this. I'm not sure how it's now. So I always this just sticks around with me. So I just mean the abilities that are skill shots here. Yeah, this sums it up basically for modifications in standard macros. Now I want to talk a little bit about the cast sequence. I tried to make this really quick. So a cast sequence macro is also started by the show tooltip, and we said slash cast sequence, and now it can be a little bit confusing. The first thing we need is a reset condition. So unless you state a reset condition, the macro would only repeat, or basically only cycle back to the beginning of the sequence if you fully executed it, or you would end up in a loading screen or relog or something like that. So here we can now comma separated list spells. So my A1, my A2, my A3, and so on and so forth. This will cause the first time we press this macro button will trigger my ability 1, the second time my ability 2, and the third time my ability 3, and then it would cycle back to my ability 1. Keep in mind that an ability cannot be skipped. So if for whatever reason we cannot cast my ability 2 and we press the button, it won't just skip it, and the next time we use my ability 3, my ability or the ability has to be executed in order to advance in the sequence. So in case you have some kind of like damage cooldown in here, you need to have it available. So if, for example, This is usually this should hinder you a little bit to put like your entire rotation basically in one cast sequence, and it's always optimal. And it also stops you a little bit from putting the entire like basically making everything one button, because when you are under haste buffs, for example, you can cast more spells in between too, and then things change. So keep in mind that cast sequence has to be used carefully, and it's very important. Every single spell in the sequence has to be executed in order for the sequence to advance, or a reset condition is met true. And we come to this right now. And we write reset and an equal. And when you put a number, this would cause the macro to reset 10 seconds after it was pressed the last time, not 10 seconds after the first time it was pressed, 10 seconds after it was pressed for the last time. Then it cycles back to the beginning no matter where in the sequence it is. You can also have different multiple reset conditions. You would separate them here with a slash, for example, combat. This would cause the macro when you leave or enter combat to cycle back to the beginning. This is usually the statement that you usually you have a timer and a combat thing in, because you always want the cast sequence um, to be resetted when you enter combat. You do not want to have it stuck somewhere in the sequence. This is one of the most used cases for this is for druids if they want to use the vortex and the typhoon combo, where you knock all the enemies away and then they come back dead center in the vortex. You would have something like this: reset 10, and then you would say Ursul's vortex and then typhoon, and basically just press this button twice and you would execute the combo. One thing that needs to be said is you can also put conditions here. For example, something like add cursor. Add cursor. I found it out the hard way. For some reason, the condition that is for the first ability needs to be written before the reset condition. So I had it be after. And this would cause the macro to sometimes like not work or use the second ability. It was just really weird. So the condition, for example, something like add cursor, for the first ability needs to be written before the reset, and then you can say something like the second ability should be add player. These are normal ones. You can also have here conditions that evaluate to false under certain conditions, and then this would not be executed. So if I have like add player or add focus, comma exists, the ability 2 would only be used if we have a focus. Otherwise, it would go to the third ability, right? But I have not used these kind of macros, like sequences with multiple in between basically conditions often, so I'm not sure about the limitations there. Keep that in mind. One important step thing at the end, this video reaches half an hour. I hope you learned something. If you want certain of your equipment slots to be used in a macro, you can either put the ability or the item name here, but they usually use a lot of space. And make things if you change the item, for example, if it's a macro for a trinket slot, if you change the trinket, suddenly your macro does not work anymore, and therefore every item slot in the game or on your character sheet has a number. For example, the both trinket slots are 13 and 14, so you would say something like here you would say cast and then 14, and this would be the second trinket. You can look it up in the wiki. For all the other slots, usually it's numerically from here to here, and then the weapons or the weapons between. I'm not 100% sure. Look this up. You can Google it really easily if you need it. So you can have numbers for equipment slots, and also since Dragonflight, we do not have this kind of easy top to bottom talent tree anymore, where you have the rows and in every row you can select three, one of three. We have now the trees with multiple like paths and things like that. So Blizzard added another condition statement. This is the one I forgot, and this is called known, and then colon, no, and then like to the double colon thing. You say known, and then the spell ID or the name. Usually you would put the spell ID of the talent in, and then only if you have talented into it, this would work or evaluate to true. So something like this. This sums it up. This sums it up for macros in World of Warcraft. I hope I could help you writing your own macros. Like I said in the beginning, macros are insanely powerful, and you can make so much things so much easier with them. I think everyone who is trying to step up their game a little bit in Mythic Plus or PvP, but usually PvPers, they know their macros really good. But I have from my perspective, a lot of players do not do know macros, and they just get them from the internet, and it's a magical thing for them that works. But I think it's really, really simple, really, really powerful thing, easy to learn, that can step up your game so much because you can make certain things work exactly like you wanted on just one button. Thanks for watching. I'm out, and keep grinding.